theoretical framework, I've choose the concept of language and power because I want to see that how language can help someone to express their feelings and what. Because I'm doing a research on bibliotherapy, so I think um, the concept of language and power works with it more. But I have to say that I'm still looking for maybe something that is more suitable for my research, like social hierarchy or what. I still don't know. But as so far, I've choose this language and power. Um, yeah, okay. But for my key concept, there are like few things that I've choose, like patriarchal terrorism, and then domestic violence, and also resiliency factors, and maybe something about impact of trauma. Um, but
Remind me your poet again,
uh,
Nikita Gill.
no, it's Rupi
Rupi.
Kaur.
And which book of poems are you looking at for
Okay.
her?
Since she's an Insta poet, so she keeps on posting her poetries on Instagram. So some of her poems are from Milk and Honey, I think. She has two books, and the poems that I've choose few are from her first book, and few are from her second book.
Why not choose only one book? Why apa nama? Why have why choose different books?
Oh,
What's your rationale?
because the since I've chosen something about harassment and abuse, um, the sometimes all the poems in her like her Milk and Honey books are not just about harassment. It's like a collection of that. So in Milk and Honey, there's about just three poems about harassment, I think.
So what is Milk and Honey about? I'm looking for the book now.
Okay, most of the thing about Milk and Honey, there are a few about harassment, and then there's something about insecurities. There's also about natural disaster, something like that.
Natural disaster.
And also, um, uh, wait, I need to.
So the because she's got three collections. She's got Milk and Honey, Sun and Her Flowers, and Homebody. Homebody is the latest one.
Oh yeah, how many is the
So
latest?
so which because for the undergraduate level, I would prefer if you just chose one collection of poems, and
Okay.
then from that collection of poems, narrow it down to say poems that deal with the theme of if you go up a little bit in your issues that you have identified, resilience, for
Oh,
instance,
resilience. Okay.
or patriarchal, what was it, domestic abuse, or patriarchal
Um, violence.
violence. So I would recommend
Okay.
simplify your scope by saying you are looking at her 2020s collection of poems, and looking at her uh, depiction of resiliency as a theme.
Oh,
So then you
okay.
go into what is resiliency in chapter 3. You go into what is resiliency, how is resiliency demonstrated, what causes somebody to be without resiliency, what causes somebody to develop resiliency. So you explore resiliency as a field of study, as a field of research. Then you bring in whatever theories that are relevant. That way, even though language and power is at the core of your discussion, you are using the theories of resiliency or grit as a means to study Rupi Kaur's one collection of poems.
Oh, okay. So like it's better for me to choose just like from one books and study the whole
I
book.
personally feel yes,
Oh, okay.
because yeah, if I can just share something with you,
Alright.
because I think it will simplify it for you. Okay,
Alright.
because I'm just looking at what you already have rather than I'm suggesting something. So based on what you have,
Okay.
so if you look at resiliency, can you see the screen that I'm sharing right
Ah,
now?
yes. Yes, Doctor.
So when you look at resiliency, you're looking at it from a particular perspective, from a particular lens, psychological lens. Okay, uh,
Mm,
you may look at certain factors, right? There are certain factors that promotes resiliency. There are also certain factors that may inhibit, may restrict the development of resiliency. So this is the bit, if you are looking at resiliency, these are the things that you will discuss in your chapter 3. They will form your theoretical framework. You will take the methodology used by others, say for instance in this research, right? Or you may look at resiliency from other perspective. You know, resiliency as a concept, as a field of studies, covers various well-being, both psychological, emotional, physical, spiritual, as well as social, as well as your relationship with other people, right?
okay.
So when we think about resiliency, you can come from it from various perspectives. You can come from a developmental perspective, from the perspective of trauma, right? As well as from health and humanistic perspective, which focuses on positive psychology. So the purpose of this discussion is what is resiliency within the field of positive psychology, within the field of mental well-being, and then ask yourself, how can resiliency be used as a framework to study other people's representation of character development? That's what chapter 3 will be about. So for instance, what are things that can be done to promote resiliency? What are things that can be done to inhibit, to restrict resiliency? What does the science say? What does the field of positive psychology, what does the science say about it? Then based on that, we come up with a certain methodology. You use the methodology to study Rupi Kaur's selected poetry. So instead of saying, I'm going to choose a few from here, a few from here, and a few from others, you know.
Okay.
Um, so um, Yeah. So instead of saying, I'm going to choose some from the 2014 collection, I'm going to choose some from the 2017 collection and others from the 2020 collection, let's not do it that way. Let's make it more, let's narrow the scope, you know?
Okay.
So when you narrow the scope, you're doing a case study. You're not saying that this research is comprehensive of all of Rupi Kaur's poetry. You're saying the study that I'm doing, the study into resilience, representation of resiliency in poetry, is based on one collection of Rupi Kaur's poetry. So maybe you choose the 2021. No, depending, you need to get to know all three collection so that you can say, okay, out of all three, I feel like there's a lot for me to say in the latest collection, or in her first collection, or in her second collection, whatever. It's good
Alright.
to know that every 2 or 3 years, every three years, she publishes another collection. So there is a kind of a growth, it's a kind of a process. But for the purpose of your undergraduate thesis, you don't want to show your research covering every all her developmental process, from the 2014 right to the 2020, the last 6 7 years. You don't want to focus on that. So for an undergraduate thesis, I would say look at one collection, either the 2014, 17, or 20. And even from that one collection, you may have a list of criteria. What are you looking for in the selection of poems? Based on the criteria, we'll talk about that later. Based on the criteria, you go through the entire collection and then say from the entire collection, which ones fits the criteria that I have identified. And then from that criteria, shortlist, the collection of poems that you want to study. Then you use your framework to study a representation of resiliency in Rupi Kaur's selected poems from a particular anthology. So that's your framework.
Okay.
That way, it's more objective, because your rationale for selection of corpus must be objective. It cannot be convenient sampling. I take a little bit from here, I take a little bit from here. It sounds very convenient, then it's not objective.
Oh, okay.
You understand?
Yes, yes.
And do you have any question?
Yes. Okay,
On
like
this?
okay, since before this, I've chose like couples of poems from here and there, right? But as for the key concept is like resilience, patriarchal violence, domestic violence, and all. Um, like if let's see if I see I choose seven, is that all seven poems must have the resilience things?
Yes. Yes.
Oh, so I
Because
can't
because
like.
Because if you remember from earlier discussion, one of the things I said was you have fixed variables and you have fluid variables that are moving. The fixed variables should be variables that allows you to study the text based on the criteria that you have developed. Now you've got a few variables. You've got harassment and abuse. You've got resilience. You've got patriarchal power. Is it? What was the
Patriarchal violence.
patriarchal violence? So you've got domestic abuse. So you've got many variables. And then you have poems from different collections. So that's another fluid variables. But if variables are too many and moving around, there are lots of moving parts, it's difficult to study the corpus in a comprehensive fashion, because then you have to take one variable and go through all seven poems. Then another variable go through all seven poems. And another variable go through, yeah. So if you have one that is fixed, okay, in terms of the variable for the issue, I'm only looking at this. For instance, resilience. And I'm going to use the resilience to study all the poems and then make certain conclusions about Rupi Kaur, the poet that came up with these seven poems. So that becomes like a case study. So then your research impact becomes more meaningful. Whereas if you've got so many variables, so many issues that you're looking at, and you've got so many poems coming from different collection, what is the impact of your research? Because it's like you're doing so many different things, but it's not focused,
Oh, okay.
right? So you may end up getting lots of findings, but how is the findings impactful? Are you going to say that Rupi Kaur's selected poems has elements of domestic abuse and patriarchal abuse and resilience? Like, how do you make that kind of conclusion? Because you're not studying all her poems, and yet you're using all these concepts to study some of her poems, you know? So at the end of the day, in order to make it more objective, it's best to narrow the scope, narrow it enough for you to have something to discuss, some findings to get. So if your collection of poems is too little, you find that you don't have enough things to say. Maybe some poems do not cover resiliency, right? So I would suggest, I'm going to go through it as well now because I've just downloaded her collection. Out of the three the three anthology, which one are you most familiar with?
I haven't finished reading the Homebody as it's still new. So
Have it?
far,
I can send it to you. Do you have it?
yeah, yeah.
All three?
I just have Milk and Honey and the Sunflower.
The Sun and Her Flowers.
Uh,
Can you download Homebody from the
okay.
link that I shared, the b.ok link, the free website for books? Are you able to download it?
I'm trying to.
Because what we can do is um, we can go through it, and then based on your preference, based on your own feeling of I like this poem better because it speaks to me. I like this poem better because I feel like there is something I can say about it. So it's best to go through her entire collection and then decide which collection seems to speak to me, which collection seems to have some things for me to discuss.
Doctor, I can't download the book. I don't know why. I don't know why I can't download it. Um,
Um,
maybe. What's the website again, Doctor?
um, I'll share with you on the WhatsApp. Okay, I just shared it on our WhatsApp.
Oh, okay.
Because my personal feeling is you want a framework that allows you to say something about how bibliotherapy can be used to promote psychological well-being, emotional well-being, right? So to
Yes.
study the poems for issues of harassment and abuse, how does that help promote psychological well-being? It's the possible solutions that we can kind of develop that allows us to create therapy using words, using poetry or fiction, so I feel like resilience will be a better framework to develop, in which you look at the way conflicts are being discussed and presented by Rupi Kaur. This is just my suggestion. Okay, but before that, we need to know the kind of poems that she is creating, and based on the poems that she's creating, we'll be able to decide what's the best framework. Maybe her poems can better be read for issues of agency, the ability for the persona to do something about her situation, even if that something is writing out her thoughts, expressing her dissatisfaction. That is a form of agency, right? When somebody is going through abuse, if they are not able to say anything, if they are not able to articulate and express their sadness and and the abuse, if they're not able to ask for help, for instance, that shows the lack of agency. But if they are able to do something, even if it's something small, it might seem insignificant, like writing and publishing it on the social media. It might seem, well, what are you going to get from it? But it shows some kind of an action that she is taking in order to improve her situation. This is a sign of agency, an action that the individual is doing to get out of her situation. Do you understand?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. I would like you to kind of like explore that a little bit. Are you sure you're okay?
Yes.
Okay. So any questions?
Okay. Okay. As I've chose that language and power as my theoretical framework,
Yeah.
but if I change it to something else like um, resilience, like this, um, um, um,
You're
uh,
not changing your theoretical framework. Resilience still works within the parameters of language and power.
okay,
But this time around, the power is not in the hands of the oppressor or the one inflicting the pain. The power is taken back. So when you talk about knowledge and power, sorry, language and power, one of the key things to remember is when the person has knowledge, the person can begin to exercise power, right? So this idea of language and power is not just something that is in the hands of the oppressors, the people who are causing the pain, the people who are inflicting abuse. It can also be taken back by the reader, by the writer, through the act of expressing what is going on, as well as through the act of reading and reflecting on what's going on. So you as a reader,
okay,
you're reading this, you are also in the act of understanding language and power, because you are empowering yourself. What's the root of empowerment? Is power. Power for the self. How do you gain power for yourself? You don't do it by abusing somebody. You do it by taking control of your own ideas, your thoughts, right? So it still comes back to language and power and the way you articulate. If I say things like I'm a loser, I'm a nobody,
okay,
because that person hurts me, I'm a nobody. But look at the way Rupi Kaur describes the situation. Does she describe the process, whatever negative experience is going on? Does she describe it as a hopeless case? Her themes of writing, is there any theme of hopelessness? Is there any themes of hopefulness? How does she use words, language, to show power for herself, for her persona, right? So we use words. Words may be nothing much to some, but to those who are experiencing psychological trauma, physical abuse, emotional abuse, words are the only thing they have to improve their situation, to elevate themselves,
Okay.
right? So when you talk about language and power, there's a lot of things to think about. It's not just in the hands of the haves, the dominant. It can also be modified to be in the hands of those who do not have, right? The have-nots. How they use language to express their situation is already a mark of their power.
All right.
Okay, like for instance, when you told me just now at the beginning that you have moved from university to come back to the house to help your mother, the way you described it, you didn't say, my mom forced me to come back. I didn't have any choice. You see the way you described it, you said you don't, because your mom works, you don't want your mom to have to do everything. You wanted to help. That shows you had the power of choice. So the way you describe your situation reflects your level of power. Are you are you being forced to? You have no choice. So your language that you use reflects your power. Now you are studying a poet
Yeah.
whose whose profession is based on her use of words and language. How does she capture the issues that she is portraying in her poems? Does she show her characters as if they don't have any agency, as if they don't have any power? What kind of words, metaphors, similes is she using? So that shows language and power. So the theory doesn't need to change. What aspect, what component of the theory? You don't want to cover everything. For the undergraduate thesis, you don't have to go through that breadth and depth. you
All
know
right.
so I would say, out of all that you have shared just now, choose one to show either language and power and the kind of um, social ills or the kind of positive impact that it can have. So you don't want to do everything. So just choose one element or one aspect of it.
Oh,
Okay?
so that means like from the collection that I will choose after this, it doesn't matter whether it is sexual abuse or mental abuse or what, as long as there is something related to resiliency, I can choose that poems.
Yes, because then you can show that, okay, say for instance, you are only focusing on sexual abuse. So you go through the entire collection and you say, out of the entire collection, these 20 poems are about sexual abuse. Okay? Then you're going to analyze for your chapter 4, you're going to analyze the 40, the 20 poems, and you're going to ask yourself, how does she describe sexual abuse? That will be one research question. How does she describe it? All right. Does she describe it using more positive words? Does she describe using more negative words? Does she describe showing the power in the hands of the sexual abuser? Does she show the victim claiming back her power? So you can discuss all that. So you are also looking at the theme, but you are also looking at the cause and the effect on the individual who experiences abuse.
Okay.
That way, the impact of your reading, you are making some important statement about Rupi Kaur through the selected poems. So the research must have some impact, right? It's no point in just looking at 7 poems and then you don't have any conclusion that you can draw from it. So it's best to narrow the scope so that the conclusion will be a lot easier to draw. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, yes,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. So maybe I would suggest for the next meeting, you go through the poems, you go through the anthology, and you categorize it. Say sexual abuse, anthology 1, How many poems are there about sexual abuse? 2014, 2017, 2020. And then go for another theme, patriarchal violence. How many poems in collection 1, 2, and 3? Poems about resiliency. How many in collection 1, 2, and 3? So then you can tell which are the which theme and which anthology is best for this study.
Okay.
So in chapter 3, just to quickly recap, in chapter 3, you will discuss the theory of language and power. And within language and power, you will discuss what are some of the fundamental aspects, what are some of the fundamental themes under language and power. And then you will decide which one you will explore more for your study. Then for the one you have explored, you have identified, you will then have to describe in detail what are the key components of the first concept or the second concept and the first concept, and up to you. Then using these key components, you will then analyze Rupi Kaur's poems, selected poems.
All right.
Which means other people may look at your thesis and they may choose to use the same framework to study another poet's work.
Okay.
That's how your research becomes beneficial to other people, because you have developed a framework using language and power. You've developed a framework, a conceptual framework. That framework, you're going to use it as a case study to study Rupi Kaur's work. But somebody else may come in and say, oh, you know what, I want to study using this framework to study maybe Nikita Gill's work, maybe some other popular Instagram poet, or maybe even to study a classic poet from the past, from the 20th century or the 19th century. So your research becomes their reference.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay, so like for my chapter 3, I have to talk about the language and power and also talk about the resilience, and then the
Any key concepts you find within language and power, and then choose which one you want to spotlight on, which one you want to explore further.
okay, like root everything and then choose one from that to
So what you
like
have shown right
elaborate.
now,
Okay,
that's fine.
okay,
Yeah, what you have shown, don't remove anything, that's fine. Then decide which one you want to explore as a conceptual framework. If you chose patriarchal violence, how does patriarchal violence manifest in literature? How does it manifest in text? You see the actions. What kind of acts are demonstrated as patriarchal violence? So you need to go into it and explore it further, so that you can find that evidence in the poem a lot easier.
okay,
So patriarchal violence may come in the form of physical abuse. It may come in form of verbal abuse, calling somebody, calling somebody bad names, like a husband calling the wife stupid, or you're no good woman, something that's verbal abuse. Then there is psychological abuse, when the husband, for instance, doesn't allow the wife to go and meet her family members, doesn't allow the wife to go out anywhere, and the wife has to stay indoors, doesn't allow the wife to interact with people on the social media. So there's a lot, kind of a policing. He becomes, it becomes like an imprisonment. So that can be psychological abuse. So what do the theorists say about that? What kind of acts are seen as physical violence? Oh, sorry,
okay.
no, patriarchal violence.
Patriarchal
Sorry,
violence.
yeah, stuff like that.
Okay.
Does that help? Because what I'm asking you to do is to simplify your research rather than do too many things. What you have presented, that is the general introduction. That's fine. But out of all that, just choose one or maybe maximum two concepts.
Okay.
And then we explore those concepts further. study more about it, read up about, a bit about it a little bit more, write on it a little bit more. Then your conceptual framework is ready. Then you can start your analysis.
All right, sure. I have a question. Like, for this chapter, like the exact page that I have to reach is
Keep it down to 7 or 8.
708. Like,
Yeah.
okay,
Right now you've got about four, is it?
five,
Five.
five,
Yeah.
and
So
six
so
for
I'm I'm
reference.
I'm looking for another couple of pages on expanding on the concepts that you have identified.
All right,
All right. And then you have a paragraph to describe the methodology. How will you conduct the analysis using the concepts that you have identified? How will you conduct the analysis?
all
And
right,
that's when you will, describe the poems that you have chosen, how you have chosen these poems, what will you look for in each poems. Maybe you're talking about language and power, maybe you're looking at metaphors that describes power, metaphors that describes abuse of power. If you're looking at resiliency, also metaphors or actions that demonstrates resiliency. So how is resiliency or abuse captured in the poems? What symbols are used? So how will you analyze it? You decide. We can talk about that later, but for
okay,
now I would like you to decide on the actual themes of language and power, the sub themes of language and power that you feel most comfortable, that you feel like I have something to say about this. I have something to say about this, and I'm going to use Rupi Kaur's selected poems to say something about this.
okay. As for now, I'm quite sure for using resiliency because
Okay.
it shows more to its language and power.
Yeah.
So I'll do a deeper research and write more about it after this.
So look at positive psychology. Look at works by Martin Seligman. Look at works by Angela Duckworth Lee. I will send you the names on our WhatsApp, but look for specific scholars and just focus on that. Don't try to cover. I mean, you can't do too many things.
Okay.
One scholar's definition and scope of resiliency might not be the same as another scholar's definition. So, because of that, the limitation of your research is you're not taking everybody's definition, you are only narrowing it down to one or two scholars.
All right.
That would be your strength, but that's also the limitation.
All right.
Okay, so and I would like to meet you again next week for an update
Oh,
because I
all
would
right.
like I would like chapter 3 to be done before Eid,
Oh, all right.
inshallah.
Sure. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, any other questions?
Um, actually, I have like, like currently we are doing for internship um application. I actually I'm quite confused on what field actually our courses suits because sometimes they